Last time we looked at St. Augustine's two-part solution to the problem of freedom and foreknowledge. In this lecture, I want to look at Boethius's four-part solution to the same problem. To illustrate that it is indeed the same problem that they're both concerned about, I first want to look at how Boethius describes the problem. So if you're heavy reading, I want to take a look at page 100. And then he gets another statement of the problem on page 102. But here's how he describes the problem, I think, to illustrate that he and St. Augustine are interested in the same thing. So here's what he says on page 100. There seems to be a considerable contradiction and inconsistency, I said, between God's foreknowing all things and the existence of any free will. If God foresees all things and cannot be in any way mistaken, then what Providence has foreseen will happen must inevitably come to pass. So if God has prior knowledge from eternity not only of men's actions but also of their plans and wishes, there will be no freedom of will, for the only action and any sort of intention which can possibly exist in the future will be foreknown by divine providence, which cannot be misled. If such actions and aspirations can be forcibly diverted in some direction other than was foreseen, certain foreknowledge of the future will no longer exist, but instead there will be vacillating opinion, and I regard it as sacrilege to believe this of God. The second statement comes on page 102. In the first full paragraph there, here's what he says. So what is the solution? How, I wonder, can God know beforehand that these uncertainties will come to pass? If he thinks that things which possibly may not happen will necessarily occur, he is mistaken, and this is sacrilegious both to contemplate and to utter. But if he decrees that the future is as it really is, in other words, realizes that future events equally may or may not happen, what sort of foreknowledge is that, since it constitutes nothing definite or unchanging? How does this differ from that absurd prophecy of Tiresias, each utterance of mine will come to pass or not? Again, how does divine providence rise above mere human opinion, if like human beings she assesses as uncertain those things whose outcome is uncertain? But if no such uncertainty can reside in that most unerring source of all things, then what God assuredly knows will happen is guaranteed to come about. What follows from this is that there is no freedom for human plans and actions. Since the divine mind foresees all of them without straying into error, he confines and restricts them to a single outcome. So I think what we see here is that Boethius is interested in the very same worry that St. Augustine is. And so I think that the way that we formulated the problem when we looked at St. Augustine, I think can be formulated in the exact same way for Boethius. And so when we look to see how Boethius is getting around the problem, I think we can see and we can consider which premise of that initial formulation he is denying. So Boethius is going to offer a four-part solution to this problem, or whereas St. Augustine's two parts could kind of actually be pursued independently of one another, the four parts in Boethius' solution work together. They're almost like four premises in a single argument as a counter-argument to the problem of freedom and foreknowledge. So I want to actually take you through in the text where he's exploring this four-part solution. And so once again, open up your text, and I want to take a look at where he starts introducing his solution on page 110. And then I'll pause when I see each one of these four steps, and I'll explain in more detail what he has going on here. So on page 110, the second paragraph in chapter 6, here's the way he starts. It is the common view of all who live by reason that God is eternal. So we must ponder what eternity is, for this will clarify for us his divine nature and his knowledge alike. So what Boethius is suggesting here, and this is the first claim in his four-part solution, is that in order to solve this problem, in order to figure out how we can be free even though God knows what we're going to do, we have to have a proper understanding of how God is related to time. And the claim here is that God is related to time by being eternal. Now, what does it mean for something to be eternal? This is what Boethius is going to go on to explain to us in the next couple of sentences. So let me read it, and let me try to unpack what he means by God being eternal. So he says, eternity then is the total and perfect possession of life without end, a state which becomes clearer if compared with the world of time. For whatever lives in time lives in the here and now, and advances from past to future. Nothing situated in time can at the one moment grasp the entire duration of its life. It does not as yet apprehend the morrow, and it has already relinquished its yesterday. And even in your life of today, you humans live for no more than that fleeting and transient moment. So anything subject to a status within time Even if it has had no beginning and never ceases to exist, and even if its life extends without limit in time, as Aristotle argued is the case with the world, is not yet such as can be rightly accounted eternal, for it does not grasp and embrace at the one moment the whole extent of its life, even if that life is without end. It does not yet possess the future, and it no longer owns time past. So what does rightly claim the title of eternal is that which grasps and possesses simultaneously the entire fullness of life without end. No part of the future is lacking to it, and no part of the past has escaped it. It must always appear to itself as in the present and as governing itself. The unending course of fleeting time it must possess as the here and now. So the first part of his 4 parts is to understand that God's relation to time is that God is eternal. Well, what exactly does that mean? In order to understand how God is related to time, we need to compare and contrast that to the other ways in which things can be related to time. So now we need to do a little bit of philosophy of time. We need to understand that there are actually 3 different ways that something can be related to time. So I put a handout on the Canvas page. This is the part where I really wish I had the whiteboard to be able to draw it out. But maybe the diagrams on the handout can help you understand this a little bit better. So the 3 ways in which something can be related to time is that something can be temporary, something can be everlasting, and something can be eternal. But what does it mean for something to be temporary? In order to diagram this, we first need to get the timeline, the line of time. Does time have a beginning? Does time have an end? Good question. Let's just put arrows on each side to indicate sort of our neutrality at this point about whether time is a beginning or an end. Let's just put time as one single line going from left to right. And now let's see how a temporary being would be related to that timeline. Take, for example, a temporary being such as Spot the dog. Spot the dog is a temporary being. His line of his life will be shorter than the line of time, and it will be stretched out for a certain length of time. So there are 2 things that are true of any temporary being like Spot the dog. The first thing that's true of any temporary being is that it has a beginning and end in time. There is a point in which the line begins, right? Spot's little doggy conception, right? That's the point at which Spot begins to exist, and then Spot lives his life, lives a long, full life, and then at the end, Spot passes away. Spot dies, maybe peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his loved ones. But Spot the dog, his life ends at a certain point. And so the first thing to say about any temporary being is that its existence, its life, has both a beginning and an end in time. The second thing to say about a temporary being is that not only does it have a beginning and end in time, but also that the temporary being experiences different moments in time, experiences different spots on the timeline in different periods of its life. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is, imagine we put dates along the timeline. What's the date at which Spot comes into existence, right? Let's say it's 2015. 2015 is when Spot the dog begins to exist. And so 2015 and indeed 2016 are years, are spots on the timeline that Spot enjoys as a puppy, as a young dog. Now, later on, let's say a couple years later, let's say even 5 years later, and the present day, right? So 2015 is when he starts, 2020. This year is when Spot enjoys 2020 as a full-grown dog. Gets to run outside and chase rabbits. Maybe Spot, right, has puppies of its own, but it enjoys 2020 as a full-grown dog. And then later on, let's say, I don't know, what's a good lifespan for a dog? 15 years is pretty good. So let's say 2030 or 2029 is a period of time that Spot enjoys as an old dog. And what I mean by this is that Spot does not enjoy 2029 as a puppy. And Spot does not enjoy 2015 or 2016 as an old dog. It can only enjoy certain times during certain periods of its life. So, for example, in 2020, Spot the adult dog can look back on 2015 when it was a puppy and sort of, I don't know, be embarrassed about things that it did, or look back and say, those are the good old days. And in 2029, he can also look back to his adult days and say, man, when I was in my prime, right, I was chasing rabbits all over the place. Can't do that so much anymore. So what a temporary being can do is it can indeed long for things that are in the future. So Spot, as a puppy, can look forward to 2020 when it's a full-grown dog. And Spot the old dog can look back fondly in memory of 2020 and indeed 2016, 2017 as times in which it was a young dog. So two things about a temporary being then. It has both a beginning and an end in time, and it experiences different moments in time at different stages of its life. Now let's talk about the second way in which something can be related to time. Let's talk about an everlasting being. So once again, we need our timeline, and let's talk about something that is full-blown everlasting. Let's talk about an angel, for example. Angels are created, but arguably they're not created in time. They are created in some sense timelessly. What that means is that an angel's life or career stretches just as far as the timeline does. There is no moment in time that the angel isn't there for. That's the first thing about a true everlasting being, is that it doesn't have a beginning or an end in time. It's there for all of it. There is no moment of time that it isn't there for. But the second thing about an everlasting being is something that makes it share a feature as what we saw in the temporary being. Even though an everlasting being doesn't have a beginning or end to its existence, it's still the case that it experiences different moments of time at different stages of its life. Sort of in, 1950, right? We still have, let's say, right, an angel that can look forward to 2020 in anticipation, right? Can say, wow, I can't wait to see what God's going to do then. Or an angel in 2020 can look back to the incarnation and be like, wow, when that happened, right, that was amazing. Remember that? Can talk to his buddy angels. So an angel experiences different events in time at different stages of his life in such a way that it can anticipate things in the future and remember things in the past. And so the two things about an everlasting being: doesn't have a beginning and end of time, is there for all of it, but still experiences different moments in time at different stages of its life. There's a sense in which you can have an older angel and a younger angel. It can look forward to things in time. It can look back and finally remember things that already happened. You can have a semi-everlasting being, which the Christian tradition takes human beings to be, according to which you might have a beginning in time but no end. Or there might be such a thing that doesn't have a beginning but does have an end. So you can have semi-everlasting beings that are only sort of indefinite in one direction or the other. But a true everlasting being is there for every moment of time. There's a sense in which the human soul is everlasting, only in the sense that it didn't always exist, but that it will exist indefinitely in the future as long as time goes on. Okay. So that's when that temporary being then has a beginning and end of existence, experiences different moments in time at different stages of its life. An everlasting being does not have a beginning or end of time. It's there for every moment, but it experiences different events in time at different stages of its life. It doesn't get to enjoy all of the events of history at the same point in its life. Now we get, right, now that we understand those two ways in which something can be related to time, now we get to the tricky one. Now we get to eternity. The way in which something can be related to time is that it can be eternal. So what does it mean for something to be eternal? And once again, we need to draw our timeline, right, and different years, different events in time. Now, in order to illustrate how something can be eternal, let's talk about the life of God. There are two important things, maybe three important things you can say about an eternal being. One, it doesn't have a beginning or end of existence, but not in the everlasting sense, right? So the first tricky claim about understanding the way in which something can be eternal is that in order for it to be eternal, it would have to not only have no beginning or end, but it would have to experience the whole history of the universe all at once. This makes it very different than an everlasting being. Even though it, like an everlasting being, doesn't have a beginning or end of existence, it's because it's in some way outside of time. And what that means is it experiences the whole of time all in a single sort of eternal instant. It doesn't have to anticipate things in the future. It gets things in the future. It doesn't have to remember things in the past. It's experiencing the things in the past as well. It experiences in one single instant the entire history of time. The second thing that's true of an eternal being is that not only does it experience the entire history of time all at once, sort of in a single instant, it has equal access to all times simultaneously, but it also experiences the whole of its life simultaneously. There's no sense in which it can look back on earlier decisions or things that happened to it, and it can't look forward to things that it will do in its future. For an eternal being, there is no past and no future, not just with respect to the timeline, but with respect to its own life. Not only does it experience the whole of time equally and simultaneously, it experiences the whole of its own life equally and simultaneously. It doesn't have to wait for it to do certain things. It only ever experiences the entirety of its life, all the actions and decisions it's ever going to make, all at once in a single instant. Now that's very tricky. Those two aspects of eternality there are very difficult for us to wrap our minds around. If you think you got it, here's the general rule about eternity. If you think you got it, then you're not thinking about the right sort of thing. It's supposed to elude our grasp to a certain extent. It's very tricky. But as a way of trying to help maybe us understand a little bit more about how eternity works, here's an analogy I'd like to give, something I'll call the film strip analogy. So there are two ways to watch a movie. There's the way that most of us watch movies, and there's the way that Christopher Nolan watches his own movies. So let's talk about the way in which most people watch a movie. When you decide you're going to watch a movie, maybe you invite some other people, but you set some time aside in your schedule. You drive over to the movie theater, you buy your jumbo bucket of popcorn for $30, and you sit in your chair, and then you watch the previews, which you've already seen because you have YouTube. I remember a day growing up when the first time we saw any of the previews was before the movie. Imagine that, a life before YouTube. But anyway, so you go to the movie theater, and you got your jumbo bucket of popcorn, and you sit and you're watching the previews, and then let's say you're watching Star Wars, and you watch sort of the text scroll at the beginning of Star Wars, and then you watch the first action sequences, and then you watch the story develop, and then you go all the way to the end, and then you go home disappointed. So notice the way in which you've watched that movie. You've set aside a block of time such that it takes a certain amount of time to watch that movie, and you watch different parts of the movie at different moments in time. That's one way to watch a movie. There's another way to watch a movie, and this is the way in which Christopher Nolan, or let's say, he's just an example, the director or the editor watches the film that they have created. So Christopher Nolan I use in particular because he still films a bunch of his movies in physical film. A lot of them just do it digitally, but he still prefers to do it in terms of physical film. It's a bit like how some musicians prefer to record their music on vinyl still. There's something about the sound quality that I think it captures better than the digital. So Christopher Nolan films the whole film on physical film. And then what he does when he's making the final edit before he sends it off to the distributors, what he does is, you can imagine, let's say he's making a short film. What he's got is the entire film on this really long film strip. What he does in the final edit, you can imagine he gets a big table, and on that table he lays out all of the entirety of the film strip, right, scene after scene in order. And then what he does to do the final edit is he takes a step back. And once he takes a step back, he looks at all of the film strip all at once. He looks and watches the whole movie all at once. In one glance, he's able to see the beginning of the film, the middle of the film, and the end of the film. And he can see that some entities in the movie only show up like halfway through, or only are there for a couple of scenes. You might also recognize that some entities are there for all of the scenes. These would be the everlasting beings. The temporary ones are the ones that come and go. But only he is able to be outside of the film entirely and be able to see the whole thing all at once. Not even something that's in every scene. They see the whole movie, but not in the way in which Christopher Nolan does when he's taking a step back from the big table. So my proposal is that this is something like, this is analogous to the way in which God sees the whole history of time. He sees the whole film strip all at once from his big sort of divine table. And indeed, from that perspective, he can make edits to the whole movie in a sort of interesting order. Because he has equal access to all the different moments in time, he can actually make edits on the beginning based on, right, what he sees in the end, or vice versa. Right, so he can make edits. He sees the whole thing simultaneously from a single perspective. So this is the analogy to help us better understand what it means for God to be eternal. It means that he sees the whole history of time in a single glance. He sees all the events in history, past, present, and future, all at once. That's, I think, the best way to understand what it means for God to be eternal. Boethius thinks this is the secret to solving the problem of freedom and foreknowledge, but that's not clear yet. Even if we did think that God was eternal in these ways, that he experiences the whole history of time all at once, and experiences his whole life all at once, how does that actually help us solve the problem? Now we have to pick up. Remember, I hope you still have your books with you, or you have your readings with you, because here's where we pick up the next stage of his solution. This is on the bottom of page 111. Let's skip the two paragraphs in the middle there and jump right to the bottom. Here he says, so it's explained what it means for God to be eternal. And he says, therefore, since every judgment which is made comprehends the things lying before it according to its own nature, and since God's status is abidingly eternal and in the present, his knowledge too transcends all movement and time. It abides in the simplicity of its present, embraces the boundless extent of past and future, and by virtue of its simple comprehension, it ponders all things as if they were being enacted in the present. Hence your judgment will be more correct should you seek to envisage the foresight by which God discerns all things, not as a sort of foreknowledge of the future, but as knowledge of the unceasingly present moment. For this reason, it is better to term it providentia, looking forward in time, rather than praevidentia, looking forward in time. For it is not set far apart from the lowliest things, and it gazes out on everything as from one of the world's lofty peaks. So far we got two parts of his solution. Then the first is just to say that God is eternal, understood in the way in which we described it. The second claim is that because God is eternal, every moment of time is actually equally present to him. For him, there is no past, present, and future. He experiences the whole history of time simultaneously, and so it's all equally present to him. Okay. Now we need to know, okay, we're getting closer to the solution, but we don't have it quite yet. Let's keep reading. Why then do you demand that things surveyed by the divine light be necessary, when even men do not pronounce as necessary the things they see? Surely when you observe things before you, your seeing them does not impose any necessity on them. Of course not. But if it is appropriate to compare the divine present with the human, then just as you men see certain things in this temporal present of yours, so God sees all things in his eternal present. Hence this divine foreknowledge does not change the nature and character of things. God sees them as present before his eyes, as they will emerge at some time in the future. Nor does he make confused judgments about things. With a single mental glance, he distinguishes those future events which will occur by necessity from those which will not. Consider this parallel. When you observe at the one time a man walking on the earth and the sun rising in the sky, even though you see them simultaneously, you distinguish them, and you judge the first movement to be voluntary and the second to be necessary. So it is the same with the divine vision, as it looks out on the whole world. It certainly does not dislocate the nature of those things which for God are in the present, but which in their temporal aspect are in the future. So when God knows that something is about to take place, something which he is well aware need not come to pass, this is not an opinion, but knowledge which rests on truth. So the third part of Boethius' solutions, the first part is that God is eternal, understood as outside of time, experiencing the whole of time simultaneously. And because God experiences the whole of time simultaneously, every moment of time is equally present to him. The third claim is something like this. Our knowing, when we know that certain present actions are taking place, our knowledge does not make those things necessary or forced. And the example that Boethius uses here is something like if you're looking towards the sunrise and you see the silhouette of a man walking in front of that sunrise. Now, because you're watching it occur in the present, there's a sense in which it can't be otherwise than how you perceive it, as long as your perceptual faculties are reliable. And so, right, okay, you're seeing the sunrise, right? Can the sun not rise? You're going to say, well, no, if I'm seeing it's rising and my sensing faculties are reliable, then it can't be otherwise than it is. The sun just is rising. It can't be any different than that. Okay, well, you're also seeing the silhouette of the man walking. So he can't be doing anything but walking because you're seeing it and your sight faculties are reliable. Yeah, okay, he can't be doing anything other than walking either. Ah, so do you mean, right, that both of these things are forced and that they are not free? What Boethius says our reply should be is that, well, it depends, right? It depends on the thing we're talking about. The sun is rising and I see it, and so I know that the sun is rising, and so it can't be otherwise. And there's a sense in which, okay, yeah, the sun doesn't freely rise. But the silhouette of the man walking, even though I see it and know it and it can't be otherwise, it still seems like that's compatible with him freely doing it. Here's another example. Imagine you're at the football game. Boethius uses earlier on the example of a chariot race, but none of you guys, unless you've watched a lot of Ben-Hur, know what a chariot race is. So let's talk about a football game. You guys know about football games. You're watching the football game, and the star running back is running toward, he breaks the tackles, he's got the football, he's running towards the end zone. And you see him running towards the end zone. And your buddy says, wow, are you seeing this? Yeah, I'm seeing this. Do you know whether he's going to make it to the end zone? I don't know whether he is, but I do know that he's running towards the end zone. Oh, so he can't be like doing the dishes. No, he can't be doing the dishes. He's running towards the end zone. That's what he's doing, and he can't be doing anything other than what I know he's doing. Oh, so do you mean he's not freely running towards the end zone? It's like, no, I don't mean that at all. Even though he can't be doing the dishes, right? Or he can't be doing anything else other than running towards the end zone. What I'm excited about, what we're cheering about, is that he's freely running towards the end zone. That's what makes it exciting, right? It's not just robots, right? That it's not just marbles running down the hill, right? That they are conscious, free agents making decisions in split-second decisions within time. And so the move here is to say that when you presently watch things as they occur, your present knowledge does make them certain in a way, but it doesn't seem to undermine the possibility of their being done freely. And bringing all these pieces together, the fourth part of Boethius' solution is says, okay, well, if God sees everything in the present, and you think that when you view something in the present, it doesn't make it unfree, now let's put the pieces together. Similarly, God's knowing that future actions, which are present to him, are taking place, does not make them necessary. Just like when you watch the running back run towards the end zone, it doesn't mean that he's doing it unfreely. Just when you watch the silhouette of the man walking in front of the sunrise, doesn't mean he's not freely doing it. In a similar way, God sees the future for you as present. He's watching you make your decisions in the future. But watching something happen in the present doesn't force that thing to happen. It doesn't seem to make it necessary. And so that's the way in which Boethius thinks that we can preserve our freedom. Once again, here is his four-part strategy. One, first claim is that God is eternal, understood in the ways that we described. Two, because God is eternal, every moment of time is equally present to him. Three, our knowing that certain present actions are taking place in the present does not make them necessary. And so four, similarly, God's knowledge that future actions which are present to him are taking place does not make them necessary. So Boethius brings in God's eternity. He thinks that we need to do a little bit of philosophy of time in order to see what the proper solution is to the problem of freedom and foreknowledge. Once again, though, we might wonder whether that solution is successful. The only way it's successful is if it properly allows us to deny one of the premises in the formulation that I gave a couple lectures ago. So which premise is Boethius denying? I think Boethius, too, is denying either premise 4 or 5, depending on what we mean by necessary. Now, because God sees in the present, it is true that I cannot do anything other than what God knows I will do. But Boethius seems to be denying that means that it's necessary, means that it is forced, means that it is unfree. And so I think Boethius probably wants to deny premise 4. He wants to resist even the claim that this makes your actions necessary. Even if God knows them and they can't be otherwise than he knows, he wants to say that that doesn't make them necessary in the sense that they are unfree. Just like you're watching things presently unfold doesn't make them necessary in the sense of being unfree. So I think he too, like Augustine, is hitting somewhere around premise 4 and 5, depending on what we mean by necessary. So far what we've done then in these past couple lectures is we focused on one potential threat to freedom, which is God's foreknowledge. We looked at the way in which St. Augustine and Boethius formulate that problem. I gave my own sort of premise to conclusion, valid sort of syllogistic form of it. We puzzled about how they are offering solutions to this, which I think commits us to denying something like premise 4 or 5. I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Do their solutions actually work? Do they actually preserve our freedom? Even if it did work, right, what costs does it have? It does mean that God knows precisely what you're going to do, and he sees it presently unfolding. We might still think that makes us a little bit uneasy. If God sees it presently unfolding, it still seems like there's really only one course of action available to me. It still seems like the one thing that he knows I'm going to do, that's what I'm doing. Maybe what we want on account of our free will is that like the future is open in a sense that I get to design it, I get to create it however I will. But neither one of these authors seems to have a view of your free choice like that. There's a sense in which it's kind of written, not by God, by you, but there is an answer to what it is you will do. And there's only one answer. It doesn't look like there are real, robust metaphysical possibilities as at the moment of your decision. Not for either one of these authors. So we might wonder whether their successes have been successful enough. Even though they get us around the problem, have they really preserved enough of our freedom for us to preserve everything that we care about? Next time I want to move on to another related topic in philosophy, one about the existence of God.